Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Ray Roberts. I am with Cedar at Bethany, and today I just wanted to put together a conversation to talk about racial disparities and trauma. We feel that as a hospital, this is a very important subject that we should be talking about more often. So today we have here some very special guests, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and give a little bit of information about themselves for you all.
Hello, my name is Sade Ahikona. I'm a licensed professional counselor here in Oklahoma City, and I am the owner of Spoken Boundaries, LLC.
Hi, my name is Laquita McClarity, and I am the CEO and owner of Full Circle Youth and Family Services, and I'm a licensed professional counselor.
My name is Lance Smith. I am a marriage and family therapist and also a pastor here locally in Oklahoma City.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. It's truly appreciated, and I'm excited to get started. So I just want to go ahead and go right into it. So the first question, I'll start with you, Lance, if you would like to give your input. How does racism and discrimination, how does that cause trauma? What does that look like?
Well, you know, trauma is a response. I call trauma a response to a very distressing event or occurrence. And so, I mean, that can cause feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, rage, anger, uncontrollable rage, anger that can feel like it's non-ceasing, those types of things. So, you know, I don't know if necessarily I would say racism itself is trauma, but it can lead to it for sure. So for instance, like, I watched what happened to George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery. That would be a distressing event or occurrence for me, even though I wasn't there. Because I imagine myself in that particular situation, or my father, or my brother, or my uncle, or my son. That can cause a response. Or it might trigger some old feelings and old memories where I can remember being the subject of something like that. And that can take me back to a place that's very uncomfortable and cause me to have the same type of symptoms I just named: the helplessness, the hopelessness, the rage and anger.
Sade, do you have any input you'd like to add to this particular question?
Sure. I think Lance really eloquently provided examples. I just wanted to add, you know, how it can impact us in a traumatic way. So what I want to add to that information is that basically post-traumatic stress disorder impacts our worldview. And so when you experience racism and discrimination, let's say, for instance, from law enforcement, anytime that you encounter law enforcement, you might experience your heart beating fast, sweating. You might experience flashbacks or trauma triggers of some sort. And so it is important to recognize when something traumatic does happen to you, it does impact the way that you view situations going forward whenever you don't receive the proper treatment to address that stereotype of said individual.
Wow. Laquetta, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
I would just really, you know, I think the trauma is caused by accumulation, you know, of numerous stressful events, you know, such as, you know, the everyday discrimination or the microaggression. You know, Lance touched on George Floyd, and there's other ones like Philando Castile, Ahmaud Arbery, and you know, we're constantly seeing Black people being murdered on social media and TV, and these things are happening over and over again, and it seems like there's no resolution. And so, you know, when teenagers are being shot because their music is too loud, what does that say to, you know, our teenagers who can't even who it appears that they can't even play music without being shot and killed because, someone sees that it's too loud, deems that it's too, it's loud. And so we're replaying these images over and over in our head. And sometimes we're indulging in these images on social media, consistently looking at them. And it really affects our emotional state, our emotional health. But we're wondering, we're crying out, we're wondering why these things are still going on, and when is something going to be done about them? What can be done about it? And so, right now, we're feeling a great heightened sense of amount of distress, anger, fear. There's just a lot of emotions that are surrounding being racially profiled, murdered, even getting pulled over. And, I think that a lot of people are just reaching their breaking point. I always feel like I'm favored by the police. And I say that because they always let me go. Like, okay, go on. Like, what did you do? That you were speeding. What did I do? I go, well, you ran the stop sign a little bit, or you yelled through the stop sign, and then it's always go. But why am I so afraid when they get behind me? And so it's just the trauma and the triggers of it, and I'm just like nervous for no apparent reason other than, like, oh, could this go wrong at any time? So.
Wow. Love the input. That's great information. And I know that kind of going into the next one, there's probably, I think you've kind of covered a few things, but on the youth side, how does race, ethnic differences and trauma exposure differ for, our Black youth and adults? Because I think that's one of the things that people, they don't necessarily understand that how it looks differently for us.
I think that how it looks different for us, one, is that it's a privilege to learn about racism instead of experiencing it. And so we experience, the racism, our young Black boys and girls and adults, we experience the racism, and some people just get to learn about racism. And I think that, now a lot of more people are starting to feel the impact. Other races maybe feel the impact and maybe trying to sit in it with us to feel kind of, not necessarily feel our pain, because I don't know if they would actually feel the racism that we do experience, but feeling our pain, sitting in there with us to learn about it and be more open-minded about learning, how a 15-year-old white boy and a 15-year-old Black boy can have, the same incident, but two totally different outcomes, because
Right.
one is racially profiled.
Would you like to add, Lance?
Okay. So, like, I didn't, I wasn't made aware that there was such a thing as white privilege until recently. And so I never even had the idea or could even fathom the concept that just how different kind of like what Laquita was saying, just how different my experience was and is as opposed to my Caucasian peers. So I have to constantly be socially conscious in ways that may not necessarily be like that for other people. When I'm in the store, I got to make sure that my hands aren't in my pockets when someone is watching me. I have to monitor the frustration, the anger I feel when I walk by a door and somebody locks it, even though I have no intention. I'm not even looking at trying to get into their car or anything like that. Where I live and what is accessible to me also can be impacted by racism. My access to education and even a proper diet can be impacted by that. My ability to even vote for causes that would help me and people like me to advance can be impacted by that. the environment that I grew up in, filled with alcohol and drugs, as opposed to books and learning and those types of things, all can be impacted just by this idea of race. And it doesn't work like that for everybody. I didn't realize I was in a vacuum, so to speak.
Sade, would you like to add anything to that particular question?
I definitely think the panelists really covered that question very well, but I would like to add that we also have to continue to work and receive our education on top of experiencing these things. We are very resilient as a people, and essentially we are taught that we just have to overcome, we've got to pray about it. We just have to push through it. And essentially, I think it prevents us from being able to really communicate and express our true emotions and having to bottle it up. And we're taught, what happens at home stays at home. And that can be really detrimental and impactful to our people. And essentially, we don't reach out for professional help because we don't trust systems, because systems such as law enforcement, such as child welfare, and some of the other systems that are put in place, we've seen historically that those systems cannot be trusted. And so there are so many barriers to receive treatment in regards to Black youth and adults, as well as there's not representation typically as it relates to teachers or people in the community, which is why it's so important that we educate our youth and help them pursue their educational goals, so that representation does matter, and that young people can see people of their same skin color in positions in order to mitigate and build trust within those systems.
I want to say something. You actually touched base on one of the things that I wanted to highlight. You talked about the trust of the system, and to me, that's a sign of trauma that someone has experienced because of these racial disparities, or because of discrimination or racism. And so that, I think that can just lead to the next thing that I think we should talk about is, what are some other symptoms of trauma that people may express? Because a lot of people say, I don't understand why people of color do things a certain way, but in all reality, I feel like certain things are just symptoms of what they've experienced. Would you like to respond to that, LaQuetta?
So,
right.
We do feel fatigue, body aches, and insomnia, difficulty concentrating, confusion, shame, guilt. And so just acknowledging or how you feel and being able to ask for help. We experience, nightmares as a symptom of trauma. And it's oftentimes difficult to cope if you don't have the access to mental health, or you don't want to, or you just don't feel comfortable reaching out for help, because you think that reaching out for help may be a sign of weakness, or you can, work through it on your own. And so just being able to sit in your emotions and be able to hold space to ask for help, when it comes to trying to alleviate the traumatic symptoms.
Okay, so Lance, I want to really talk about our African-American males or males of color. I found a study that showed that behind Native American and American Indians in 2018, people of color, African Americans, were second highest for attempts and suicide ideations, and encompassing males predominantly made up majority of those statistics. And so I want to get from you, your point of view, what does that look like for African-American male, the reason why these statistics are so high, and just give some information regarding that.
Well, I mean, I think it suggests, that some of it has really already been said. We've kind of said these things, talking about the lack of trust, that I can trust somebody to be able to help me through this issue, the hopelessness that I don't have any other way to work through this other than to take my own life. The frustration with feeling like every single day is just another day of the story of this oppression that I have to go through. And so if you think about it like that, and you take a moment to empathize with how someone who experiences things like that and doesn't have an outlet, or someone to educate them, or someone to empathize with them, and maybe even help them work through those issues, kind of like what we do as therapists. And you might I think that would bring about situations like that. Families, and I don't know what the studies are like, but it sure does seem like us as African Americans, our families, we're not very encouraged to go to therapy. We're shameful of that. That's something we don't talk about that. Oh no, we don't talk about that. And it's transgenerational. It's been passed down from generations. Mom didn't talk about that. Grandma didn't talk about that. Great, and down and down and down. And so you're stuck with this, and you don't know what to do with it. I have families, African-American families have worked with in the past, and someone wants to see a therapist in the family. Oh, that's his problem. That ain't me. I don't have nothing to do with that. That's just them, without realizing the impact that racism can even have on a family systemically over generations.
Wow.
Those transgenerational trauma, things like that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really does, and I can absolutely second that. Growing up, myself, it was always, Black people don't go to therapy. We don't have those issues, and they definitely existed. They were there, and so I'm glad that you were able to touch base on it. I know that we're starting to get a little bit short on time, so let me just go ahead and I'll move into the last question, which I think is probably going to be the most beneficial, especially for those who are searching for answers or looking for help. But Sade, can you elaborate, or just let us know how do we begin the healing process in our community? What does that look like?
Well, essentially, like I stated earlier, representation matters. So really promoting education for our youth in finding ways and scholarships and opportunities for them to achieve and further their education, so that representation does matter in those career aspects. I think secondly is teaching cultural competency and teaching people about white privilege, and creating a level of empathy for what people of color experience. We can't really change people's belief systems, but we can continue to educate the community about the struggles that we face, as well as providing law enforcement, child welfare, and systems with cultural competency training, training about mass incarceration, really trying to create policies where crimes that impact people of color, that people get fair sentences, because you can see a white person face a crime and receive different sentencing than a person of color. Additionally, I feel like we have to start talking to our kids about self-esteem and enhancing who they are so that they can be confident in who they are. Because to me, that leaves the door open for gangs and people that are negative influences to be there because the help is not present in certain communities. Lastly, I would also say that we also have to consider domestic violence. Domestic violence impacts every 1 in 4 women. And so if you can think about the children that are impacted by domestic violence, we have to teach our community that we're responsible for ourselves, that we're not responsible for what they did, but we are responsible for ourselves, and that we have the key to our own happiness. And essentially, we have to model what appropriate relationships look like. We do need to continue to work towards that mass incarceration so that there are more fathers home and present. Lastly, I know I just said that lastly again, I feel like we need to make sure that we are safe spaces for people to disclose their experiences. I feel like in our community and in the world, we victim blame. We tend to ask, why is that person in that situation, rather than trying to really walk in another person's shoes and really understand their struggles. And so to me, empathy, compassion, unconditional love and support are ways that we can heal our community.
Wow, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Well, I know that we only have a few minutes left. Is there any last thoughts that you all have? We have about 3 minutes. So, Laquetta, any last thoughts?
Sade said a lot, a mouthful, and I definitely agree with all of it. I would say in educating and in teaching that we also have boundaries around that. We also have to protect our own emotional state. And, in teaching, I would pray that their mind will be open and their hearts will be open to receive, because, some people are on the defense. And so, and then teaching can fall on deaf ears, and then that leaves that person stressed, overwhelmed, and, just feel like they're, can't get through. And so we want people to be able to empathize and have compassion and be genuine with wanting to understand racism and the trauma that can come along with that, and also that Black men need to heal as well. And they also need to rise up for our generation, our males, our young boys that are coming up. They are boys. A lot of times they're looked at as men at 13 because of maybe their physique, but there are boys, and they should be treated as young boys, being able to develop into teenage years, young men, and then into a man. And so Black men, it's okay to get therapy so that you can heal as well, so that we can heal our generation, we can heal generations to come, and that, our families can become stronger and more confident and know their self-worth. And I think that's all I got to say.
Well, we have about 1 minute left. We have about
Can
one.
I add to that really quickly, and I'll let Lance jump in probably after what I say. I just really also feel like men are told, not to express their emotions, because emotions can cost you your life, essentially, not to show weakness. But that is why it's very difficult for men to be in relationship with women and demonstrate that softer, comforting side that daughters need as well. And so we have to eliminate that stigma of boys being tough and gruff and not owning their emotions, because oftentimes underneath anger is fear and hurt and betrayal. And so we need to really readapt anger.
Lance?
Yeah, I think it's already been said. Just back, how do we change this? More education, more policy, more unconditional love. And folks need to know that it's okay to not be okay, and that there are people there that are trained and have a desire and a passion to help you get to the point where you are okay.
Right. Well, thank you all for joining us. I really do appreciate you being here and just to give that information to the community.